When something is very difficult and mistakes potentially damaging, we often describe it as being a minefield for the unwary. We'll talk about the minefield of representing yourself in court right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
Can a lawyer represent herself in court? Certainly, so can you as a layperson. But neither of you should. My guests are attorneys Wilbert Payne and Cheryl Henderson. Wilbert, Cheryl, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for inviting us.
We talk about representing yourself in court. Lawyers can represent yourself in court, I suppose. Have you ever done that?
Yes, I'm currently in litigation now where I'm
representing yourself?
Pro se.
Describe his client.
Isn't there a saying, if you're a client for you're a fool or something like that?
If you represent yourself, you have a fool for a client and a fool for an attorney.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask you that is I found myself in court a couple of times, and I always take somebody with me, at least to ask me the questions, to make sure that I've got somebody who's objective there to help me tell my side of the case as best I can. You ever represented yourself, Cheryl?
No, I haven't. I've been smart enough to always call for assistance. Although, actually, you know what? I can't recall a time I've been in court personally. So I've always been on the representing side of someone.
Well, could I ask you to give your card to Wilbert
Right.
because I think he needs to talk to you.
Well, in that situation, I have to admit that I do have a cousin who's a lawyer who's there with me. Although I am pro se, he is there. And
Technically pro se.
technically,
You and your lawyer.
And my other lawyer, my cousin. So I'm not by myself, totally.
The phrase pro se means by oneself, and when we talk about pro se representation, it means that you go to court without a lawyer, that you go representing yourself. And the problem with that is you can't be objective, and the purpose of this show is to explain, at least in some part, why that's not a good idea. The old legal saying is if you, the person, they say, well, the man who represents himself has a fool for a client and a fool for a lawyer. And we don't mean to be disparaging of Wilbert, but you got to consider that.
I have help.
You have, yeah, get some help. Where is this particularly dangerous?
I'm in Huntington, West Virginia, of course, and I do quite a bit of domestic work. Domestic work meaning divorces, child custody, visitation, parenting time, anything in that realm, so to speak, grandparents' rights, anything to that nature. In this particular field of law, I think it's very, very unhealthy, and I say unhealthy because it can really lead to massive whatever for someone to go into court and try to represent themselves. I've seen it time and time again where I have gone in representing my client, and across from me on the other side is a pro se litigant who knows nothing about the law, who doesn't know what evidence to present to the judge, and in a nutshell, they're hurting themselves by not having proper representation.
The rules in a courtroom are numerous, complicated, and in most cases pretty strict. And if you don't do it right, even if it's because you don't know to do it right, you can lose the benefit of the law almost entirely and be badly hurt.
That's right, you don't get a second chance many times.
Now, that's not to say that in small claims court, in West Virginia that's called a magistrate court, that in magistrate court you can't or shouldn't represent yourself, but even there you should be careful.
You should be extremely careful. If you go into court and you are by yourself and the person across from you has a lawyer, you can lose the issue that you are seeking or the relief that you are seeking from the magistrate court. So you need either some advice or representation. And the reason in a small claims court is because oftentimes the amount that you're seeking is going to cost you in attorney's fees. That's why you go in by yourself. But it's still dangerous. You could lose that.
Well, it's a tragic truth that lawyers are typically expensive.
Right.
And expensive is a subjective term. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to hire a lawyer to go to small claims court or to magistrate court.
Right.
But it may mean that it's going to cost you more than the case is worth
Exactly.
to hire a lawyer.
Exactly.
Sometimes. Now, one area of the law that is even worse for a person to represent themselves is in the criminal arena. One person should never do that. I've seen that time after time, that a defendant seeks to represent himself. And during my time as a lawyer, I've noticed numerous of times, once a person goes to jail and has been there for 2 weeks, they tell me they've been in the law books and they know what the law is, which took me 3 years to accomplish.
And a couple or 3 decades to figure out.
But they've been there for 2 weeks, and you know, I know what I read the books. That's what I generally hear, and it's more to it than that. And they should be very careful.
In the criminal arena, if you have no money, and if jail time is involved, in West Virginia, you're entitled to have a court-appointed
That's
attorney.
correct.
Right.
That's correct.
But sometimes it is true that people who could afford to hire a lawyer choose not to.
That is true. And why, I do not know.
Save money, I suppose.
No, when there's jail time involved, you're going to lose a lot more than money. You're going to lose time, your time, possibly.
In domestic cases, Cheryl, what does the person do who just doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer?
Well, you know, there are, we have legal aid, for instance, in West Virginia. Of course, there are income guidelines that you have to meet, but there are services provided through legal aid here in West Virginia for persons who need assistance in domestic work. You know, sometimes people don't realize I know in Huntington, for instance, there are a lot of lawyers who do work pro bono. And by pro bono, I mean free. So, you know, a lot of times I've spoken to other attorneys over the years. It's not uncommon for me to drop my fee for somebody who I know may need help, who otherwise can't afford, for instance, a $3,500 fee, but they may be able to pay a $1,500 fee. See what I'm saying? Because of their circumstances. So sometimes as attorneys, we've got to also be willing to reach out a little bit and help some of these people, help people who can't otherwise afford the quote-unquote big fees that may be entailed. But other than legal services and having an attorney cut his fee or do it, you know, pro bono, there really are no other services that I know that really are available.
There might be a couple of other avenues a person can take. One, the West Virginia State Bar has a pro bono
referral
program that can help someone. There's also on the internet, if a person has access to internet as far as family law or magistrate court, the West Virginia Supreme Court has a website where you can get all the forms, and a lot of times they have instructions with them. You just have to be diligent and read.
The West Virginia Supreme Court website has a link at their main page to self-help material on the website, and it is a good website. You find forms there, and you can find some information about representing yourself in court without a lawyer. We have a link to that website on the lawworks.org webpage, www.thelawworks.org, and associated with the description of this program, you'll find that web link that'll take you right to the Supreme Court's self-help program. I should mention you'll also find a copy of the most recent LawWorks show at thelawworks.org, and links to some of the older shows too if you've missed something or if there's a topic that you would like to explore. And these are all through YouTube, or you can go directly to the YouTube website and type in the LawWorks West Virginia or the LawWorks Dan Ringer or anything that would cause these programs to come up, and you'll find a more expansive list. We have all of the programs from at least this season available on the internet now to stream at your convenience. Enjoy them as you will. I typically do not do pro bono work except upon referral from the State Bar's Lawyer Referral Project, because it seems as though everyone wants a free lawyer.
That's true.
And
That's
sometimes it's simply because they don't want to pay a lawyer.
Right, right. And we see that. We see commonly folks who can afford an attorney in the domestic area who, for instance, go to court and represent themselves in a divorce. They get there, they don't know what issues to bring up, they don't know what they're entitled to, they miss points, they walk out the hearing, it's done. 6 months later, they come to see me. Well, I didn't ask for this or I didn't get that. Well, who is your lawyer? Well, I didn't have a lawyer. You could afford one. Yes, I just thought I could do it myself. Well, these people do themselves a disservice because now they're paying twice as much to try to have someone correct it, which a lot of times is almost impossible.
If a prospective client comes to your office and says, I've been married for X number of years, I have 1, 2, 3, however many children, we own this property or we own no property, you can probably, to a high percentage of accuracy, say this is what's going to happen in your divorce. Mm-hmm. This is what the judge is going to do, because divorce is not terribly complex in arriving at the outcome, but you have to have all of the information in front of the judge to get that outcome. It is incredibly less expensive to do it right the first time than to come back and try somehow to get the judge to undo something that has just been done. Many lawyers will tell you that they make more money fixing bad divorces than they do in getting good initial results in divorces. I guess a good example of that is if you don't know that your spouse has a retirement plan that you're entitled to a share of.
That's right.
And the share that you're entitled to can be very complex to determine. And the order that describes how it's to be divided can be horribly complex to write. You're not going to write that by yourself if you're a layperson.
Right. But right, because not only with retirements or pension funds, you've got the qualified domestic relations order that has to be prepared, that has to be sent to the company of the person that's employed. And I don't know very many lay people that know how to prepare quadros, what we call quadros.
A lot of lawyers don't know how to do that.
In fact, there are companies, contractor companies out there who do it for lawyers because it's so complex to do it.
That's right.
And if there's a military pension involved, wow, that is incredibly complex. I've gone through a couple of those, or a pension for a federal employee. Right. The basic rule is the military does not want the non-military spouse getting anything from the military service member, but they begrudgingly obey court orders, but they're very strict. They want to the punctuation mark accuracy in the preparation of these things. In other areas, we have parenting plans. In fact, when you get the forms that you have to fill out for a divorce, the forms are staggering in their complexity.
Yes, they are.
For a layperson. But to achieve a parenting plan, you must understand your rights.
That's right.
Or you will create a creature that you just can't live with.
Right. Or you'll give up rights that you otherwise would be entitled to.
Yes. And even people who are well-intentioned, couples will come in and say, this is an amicable divorce. There's nothing really in dispute. We just need to know what we need to do. First, I've only seen a couple of those in over 30 years in practice of law. There's always a sticking point somewhere. And second, even well-intentioned people need guidance. Tax issues, real estate issues, parenting issues. just issues about who gets the dog and who gets the cat.
And exactly. And sometimes well-intentioned people become bitter at some point or argumentative. So what may start out as an amicable divorce can very easily turn ugly before you know it. And then you're like, well, he said he was going to do this, or she said, what do I do now? Well, you didn't have a lawyer to tell you that.
Well, Wilbert, Cheryl and I, in this hypothetical, are married for the moment, but it's just not working out. We need to get divorced. We don't have any real issues between us. Can we both come to you and you'll just handle it for us?
No, only can represent one person. I've had that happen. Couples that would come into my office and I would say, I can only represent one of you, one of your interests. And I cannot do both of you at the same time, and I would separate them. It's just unethical.
That's outrageous. Why should we have to pay 2 lawyers when we don't have any disputes? We just want to get divorced.
Well, the reason is you can only represent that one person's interests. You can't represent both persons' interests in one proceeding.
Well, Cheryl, aren't our interests the same? We're amicable.
Sure. Well, you know, I agree with Wilbur. In my practice, of course, we're advised by the state bar and by our guidelines that no, you can only represent one person at a time. We've all had people come in at the same time. Well, we want to get a divorce and we only have to do this, this, and this. So normally, in that case, I'll say, well, I can only represent Mrs. Smith. Now, Mr. Smith, you'll have to leave. Mrs. Smith will come in. We'll enter into agreement, which he and I have agreed upon everything. In that case, I do not advise Mr. Smith, but I do prepare an agreement perhaps of what Mrs. Smith has suggested would be the agreement. We go to court, hand it to Mr. Smith, and if he's agreeable, I have not advised him in any way. I've only prepared an agreement based on what she told me what the agreement is, but I'm not giving him any advice. I think that's one way to get around it. But it would have to be pretty much an agreed type thing. And those are pretty cut-dry divorces. We're not talking about where you've got, like you said, 2 and 3 kids, a pension, a timeshare. When you've got all that, you almost most certainly need an attorney to represent both parties, both of their interests, because at some point their interests are going to be divided.
Even things that seem on their face clear to lay people may not be so clear. Let's take a case of the winning lottery ticket. Again, in this hypothetical, Cheryl and I are married. She goes out once a week and plunks down $1, buys a lottery ticket, and somewhere during the course of this investment, she actually wins something, and she wins many thousands of dollars and decides, now it's time to end this marriage. Is that her money? She bought the ticket, she won the money.
I'm going to advise my client it was won during the course of the marriage, and it's half and half. Because in West Virginia we do equitable distribution, and it'd be half and half.
But she bought the ticket.
Doesn't matter.
It's her money.
We get that argument a lot. I hear that argument a lot about the house, the marital home. Now we're not talking about premarital, but we're talking about, for instance, a guy, I'll just say the man, for instance. Man has worked, wife has stayed home. Well, why should she get half the value of the house? I've worked every day. I've gone out of the house. I've done this. I'm the one that's paid the mortgage. Why should she get half?
That seems like a good argument.
It's not a good argument. It's not a good argument. Because in West Virginia, we apply equitable distribution, which means she's entitled to a fair share. A half, 50%. But a lot of people, even today, don't realize that. They are under the assumption that for whatever reason, the other person shouldn't have half that value of the car, half that value of the pension, whatever. But then that goes with marital debts too. The debts are shared equally too, so.
Well,
a lot of times people in divorces don't want to pay the child support because they view it as she's getting the child support, not my child. And that's unreasonable because she is taking care of the child. You need to give her the money. She distributes it. She makes these decisions that you on behalf of the child, and you just pay the money.
And that's why people need lawyers.
And that's why
they need people, lawyers. They need lawyers to explain that to them, so that they fully understand how the process is going to work, and they don't feel like they've been duped, so to speak, by the court system.
Well, let's take another example of the house that you perhaps own when you get married. Well, that house is yours until you put a new roof on it, or you put a new furnace in it, or you paint it, or you landscape it. Then you're using monies that derived from the marriage. The basic rule is that if one of the parties is employed and the other one stays home, the one who's staying home is making it possible for the employed one to earn an income. Therefore, in West Virginia, the law presumes the income is shared equally between the two parties. So you've got a house that was yours before the marriage. You never put the other person's name on the deed, but you did work on the house with marital money. Therefore, part of the value of that house is shared between you, part is not. Figuring out which part is shared is
Can be
black magic.
difficult.
Can
Can
be
be
very
difficult.
Really hard.
And that comes into another point why people need legal assistance to guide them so that they know what portion is and which portion isn't. Because obviously if you're representing yourself and you're trying to figure that out, most people have no clue. They wouldn't even have a clue actually to say, well, I paid for the furnace, I got this, we added a family room on the back, we put a pool in the backyard. They even have no concept of even who to hire, how to figure out the numbers.
If you don't know it's an issue, the issue cannot be resolved fairly, and that's where an attorney can help you. Attorneys, more than anything else, know what questions to ask, and that's not just questions of the other person, it's questions of their client too, to gather all of the information so that there can be a fully informed decision. Now, the client may decide they don't want to ask for certain things, or they may not want to do something, but at least you know you had the opportunity to do it. And the court presumes that you knew what your rights were, which is why it is so hard to undo unfavorable results in a divorce case.
I think people have to realize that when they're going before the judge, that the judge cannot pick sides or help one side versus the other, whether they're represented or not. They have to be impartial, and receive all of the evidence and make a ruling.
I, a few years ago, had a conversation with a trial court judge, circuit court judge, here in the state, and I asked him, I said, what goes through your mind when you walk into your courtroom and there at one table is, say, the plaintiff and her lawyer, and at the other table is just the defendant? Not necessarily in a family law case, but just in any old case. He said, okay, one side has an attorney, the other side does not. He said, the word that comes to mind is horror, because the judge is now put in a role that the judge does not particularly want to be in, and that the judge probably shouldn't have to be in to fairly listen and decide. And what does the judge have to do in a case like that?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, I know in practice in Cabell County, I'm sure, and especially in the family court, that's seen an awful lot. And so, yes, it makes it very hard for a judge to stay impartial because he cannot give that one person advice. So normally that person is going to be at a disadvantage. I don't care how you look at it. If he or she doesn't know what their rights are, lawyer on this side is probably going to use everything he can to make sure his client is going to get the benefit of all the judge's rulings.
Yeah, and the judge feels obligated to be fair, and he sees a mismatch in legal ability there, and so the judge will typically try to advise the non-represented party with regard to procedural matters.
Right.
You get to ask your questions
Right.
now. You don't get to talk to the jury. You don't get to talk to the judge now. You do that later. Right. And that adds to the complexity. It adds to the perception of fairness, and sometimes it can drastically affect the outcome. I was involved in a case just like that one time as the lawyer representing one side. My person was being sued. The other person went in, explained the case, did all the procedural niceties, forgot to present any evidence whatsoever as to how much money he had lost in the case. Case was over, the jury was sitting there, and I said, "Excuse me, Judge, you didn't prove any damages. You need to dismiss this." And the judge said, "Yep, you're right." Dismissed it. And to this day, I don't know if that person had a valid claim or not. He never produced any evidence of losing any money.
Because he didn't know how to present it.
Didn't know that he had to do it.
Right.
The number one fear of most people is talking in public, and you're never more public than when you're standing in an open courtroom and there are people watching what you do, so you get nervous.
That's right.
Wilbert Payne, Cheryl Henderson, thank you for joining us yet again. I hope we can get together sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you also for joining us. On behalf of the LawWorks, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks show topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find video of this program at thelawworks.org, and you can find previous programs on YouTube. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The LawWorks show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a copy of this program for classroom use, please send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The LawWorks is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The LawWorks is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.